All right, everyone, let's get this next session started. Apologies, we ran over a bit in the last one, but it was a very riveting conversation and we didn't want to miss out on any questions. And the discussion was great for those of you that were able to watch that one. And those of you that weren't, it will be recorded and you can watch it later. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone joining. Welcome in or welcome back. We appreciate you being with us here today for the third day of the Aquatic Life Conference. This session relates to how we can reduce the catch of wild fish with Benjamin Freeling. Benjamin is a research scientist with particular expertise in quantitative skills, including data analysis, statistical programming, and biological and economic modeling. He also has research experience in experimental psychology, science communication, and the philosophy of animal sentience. Benjamin joined Animal Ask in October 2021, having recently submitted his PhD. He also works with the Animal Justice Party and has worked as a government fisheries scientist. And for those of you that are joining for the first time this conference, my name is Tessa Gonzalez. I'm a researcher here at the Aquatic Life Institute. And just a few brief reminders that I'm sure everybody's already aware of. The audience is muted upon entry with cameras off. All of our sessions are being recorded and streamed live on Facebook. And we expect nothing but the best in terms of being respectful and having only productive discussions. Harassment and discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated. Now, this session will be a bit different than the others. Unfortunately, our speaker, Benjamin Freeling, could not join us live today, but he was kind enough to record his presentation, so we're still able to play it for everyone here. And you are all still welcome to utilize the Q&A box for any questions you might have. And if anyone in the audience has insight related to these questions that come in, please feel free to share your knowledge, engage in conversations with one another in the chat. And for any other outstanding questions or comments, we'll do our very best to follow up with Benjamin after the conference for those that are interested. So with that being said, I will pass things to William, who will be playing the video for you guys from Benjamin Freeling.
Hello everybody, welcome to my talk. My name is Ben Freeling and today we'll be talking about a possible intervention to reduce the catch of wild fish. I should note that this is a pre-recorded talk due to time zones, but I've written my email throughout the slides, so please just feel free to reach out if anything in this talk sparks your interest or if you just want to chat fish. So before I begin, I'll give a bit of background on who I am. I currently work as a research scientist at Animal Ask. We're a relatively new organization that acts as a consultancy and provides research to help improve the effectiveness of other animal advocacy organizations. So please check out the website animalask.org and feel free to reach out if you feel like we could help you and your organization. Although I should note that I'm giving this current talk as an independent researcher and it's based on my own independent work. My own background is mostly in ecology and economics. My PhD was mostly on fisheries modeling and fisheries economics, although there are a couple of speculative essays on animal sentience and transformative social change. I spent some time in the government department responsible for fisheries management here in South Australia, and in my spare time, I volunteer for the Animal Justice Party, which is the animal advocacy party here in Australian politics, particularly helping to run the campaigns for the upcoming elections in March, which is a lot of fun. So I've had this thought, and I'm sure a lot of you have as well. For example, if you're walking in a supermarket or a produce market, and you see plenty of different fish for, X dollars a kilo, that might be $5 a kilo or $10 a kilo or whatever, and you think to yourself, I reckon I would have paid that much money if it meant that fish, instead of being caught and sold, could have not been caught and, just lived happily into its retirement. And actually, this leads to the thought, is it possible to simply pay fishers not to fish? Because in principle, if a fishery is receiving some amount of profit to catch fish, and that's their main justification, could we, in theory, walk up to them and say, hey, I'll pay you that same amount that you'd make as a profit if you just don't go fishing today and you go home instead? As it turns out, there are some mechanisms that might make this a possible intervention. Some of you might have heard of individual transferable quotas, which are also known as ITQs, or alternatively individual vessel quotas or catch shares. This is a fairly common policy mechanism for managing fisheries. Simply put, the total allowable catch is divvied up into chunks, and each of these chunks is given to an individual or a vessel to catch a certain amount of fish depending on how much they've been allocated. Importantly, for transferable quotas at least, they can be traded on the market. The system of managing fisheries is usually implemented for economic reasons that aren't so important to us. But what is important is that some fisheries allow people to buy up these ITQs on the market, even if those people aren't actually planning to use them to fish. So in theory, it'd be possible for animal advocates to pay some amount of money, buy up some ITQs, and therefore prevent some number of fish from being caught. And there's about 150 fisheries globally, last I checked, that use that mechanism for managing their fisheries. So that's briefly the intervention. If you enter one of these ITQ markets, buy up some quota and hold them unused, then in theory, you'd be preventing that amount of fish from being caught. And the numbers look pretty attractive for some fisheries, particularly these low-value fisheries like Peruvian anchovy, which back of the envelope calculations show that you could avert the death of about 1,000 anchovies for $1, or maybe more realistically, 190 Atlantic menhaden for $1. And better yet, this intervention is tractable because it's pretty easy to implement, scalable because it's pretty easy to expand to other fisheries, put in more money, and so on, and relatively straightforward to estimate how many fish deaths are averted for the most part. But there are some issues, and that'll be the main purpose of my talk today. So firstly, this intervention is naturally limited to fisheries that meet some certain characteristics. And those are that fishery has to be managed by ITQs. And as I mentioned, that limits us to about 150 fisheries worldwide. We're limited to fisheries that allow external investors to purchase ITQs. And I've had a bit of a look, and I think that's a minority of fisheries, even among those that are managed by ITQs. So that might limit us further. And in order to have a high impact and to be able to measure our impact, we're also limited to fisheries that target relatively low-value species like anchovy and have well understood population dynamics. So that limits us even further. Secondly, we're limited to buying up the quota for a very small proportion of the catch. And the reason for that is that if animal advocates buying quota becomes a major determinant of how much fish is being caught, then that'll be a major influence on government policy, and the government's likely to respond most likely by simply instating a rule that people like us can't buy the catch. So you almost have to fly under the radar a little bit. And thirdly, one of the big weaknesses of this intervention is that it's transactional and not transformational. Many animal advocates prefer going for transformative institutional change, which I strongly agree with, although there might be a place for transactional interventions in this movement as well. And if you want my thoughts on that topic more, you can check out my paper in Frontiers in Marine Science, where I talk about institutional change in fisheries at length. But yeah, nevertheless, it still might be good value per dollar. The biggest weakness, I think, or the biggest thing we have to understand at least, is the risk of rebound. So when I say rebound, I mean what people commonly refer to as knock-on effects or second-order responses or ripples and so on. And there's been lots of work in the effective altruism circles on rebound effects, and it's also been considered in a lot of other places, like in economics and policy analysis on lots of different topics, for example, energy efficiency and so on. There are three big rebound effects that risk reducing the cost effectiveness of this intervention. There are definitely more, but I'll talk about these big three. Firstly is the idea of market forces. So if you catch less fish, if we enter a fishery, hold some quota unused, the fishery ends up catching less fish. That will lead to a lower supply on the market, which would lead to higher prices, and people simply, instead of buying those fish, they'll buy other fish instead, which would increase the demand for those other fish, and we end up with more of the same amount of fish caught anyway. Secondly is government responses, which I touched on earlier. But basically, if we enter the fishery, result in less fish being caught, then the population of fish, this is a bit context dependent, but it might increase and, become more abundant, which means that the government can afford to allow extra fishing, and still, maintain the sustainability of the stock or whatever their management goal is. And you might end up with more fish caught that way. And thirdly is population biology. This one's a bit more complicated. But if less fish are caught, then again, you end up with more fish in the wild, so a higher abundance. And then through a lot of different ecological mechanisms like competition or dynamics that depend on the age structure and so on, you might end up with more fish dying anyway. So all three of these, as well as other rebound effects I'm sure you can think of, the net effect of these is to reduce the cost effectiveness of this intervention substantially. So understanding these is a really important thing before we implement this intervention at all. So what we're doing is planning a study to try to measure these rebound effects. This study will help us figure out if the rebound effects are large, in which case the intervention is less likely to be cost effective, or if the rebound effect is likely to be small relative to the cost effectiveness, in which case the intervention might just work after all. The study as we envision it, and when I say we, I'll get to who that means in a second. The study involves two main components. The first one is fishery population modeling. So here what I think a good approach is to pick 2 or 3 well-modeled fisheries that meet the criteria that I listed in that earlier slide. And since they're well-modeled, a lot of fisheries have models that are publicly available and data to run those models that is either publicly available or available without too much trouble, like from government institutions and so on. So using those models, you can directly simulate how the population and the government responds to an unexpected decrease in catch that, would be of the type that we would cause to happen in the fishery. And using these models, you get a pretty good grasp on the population biology rebound and the government response rebound. The other main component of the study is an econometric analysis. And using this component of the study, you can measure how the market forces rebound happens, so how the market forces respond to a sudden decrease in the catch. And this might be an opportune time to do this because you could use one of the many fisheries that closed due to COVID-19, due to lockdowns and so on, as a natural experiment to see how markets respond to the decrease in catch that we might implement. So, for example, if we enter a fishery and we decrease the catch by 5% or whatever, then if you track that effect through the market using econometrics, you could, in principle, see if that causes an increase in maybe purchases of other fish species. And yeah, as I say, I think a lot of fisheries have experienced artificial reductions in catches due to COVID-19, and that might be an opportune time to sort of look at those and see what happens, and we could get some understanding of how that might carry across to our intervention. So my question for you is, does this project interest you? So currently I'm talking with Wild Animal Initiative about launching a potential collaboration to carry out the study. And currently we're hunting for funding. But if that's successful, we may be looking for collaborators in the future, particularly if you have expertise in fisheries modeling or econometrics or fish welfare indicators, or if you're just interested, then please feel free to reach out. You can just chuck me an email here, ben.freeling@animalask.org. Even if you're just interested in keeping track of the project, please, just reach out and say hi and we can have a chat. Before I wrap up, there's something else I want to talk about today. And that's the question of, is reducing the catch of wild fish a good thing? So I've been thinking about wild fish advocacy for a while, and these two questions, it seems to me, are the key questions we need to answer if we actually want to know if reducing the wild fish catch is good. And just to give you a bit of perspective on my background, I think that it's likely that reducing the catch of wild fish is good, but I don't know for sure. And so there are two key considerations. The first one of which is, are wild fish lives net positive? And there's been a lot of talk in the effective animal advocacy movement in particular about wild animals having net negative lives, which I think as an idea, I'm probably a bit more skeptical of than other people in this movement. Nevertheless, it's possible. So putting some thought into whether wild fish live lives that are, as is commonly expressed, net positive or net negative, might be a useful way to answer that question. And secondly, how does decreasing catch carry over to other animals in the food web? And that could include other species, for example, through predation or competition, and that could include even other members of the same species through like intraspecific competition and effects on the age structure and so on. And I think that second consideration is more likely to lead us to consider whether whether reducing the catch of wild fish might be a bad thing, which again I'm skeptical of. But these food web dynamics are very, very complicated, and so I think it's important to understand those, at least at a foundational level, so we can have some idea of the effects that our intervention might have on other animals that are worthy of moral consideration. So yeah, these are the two considerations that could conceivably change my mind about whether reducing the catch of wild fish is a good thing. And so if anybody here is working on either of these questions, I would be keen to hear about your work, because I think these are really, really important considerations for any wild fish advocacy movements. So please reach out, and yeah, I'd love to chat about that. So that's it from me. Yeah, please get in touch if you're interested in hearing more about this project, or if you just want to chat fish. And please check out Animal Ask at animalask.org if you're interested in learning more about how we can provide research support to your animal advocacy organization. And thank you very much for listening.
Great. A big thanks to Ben. Ben, if you're watching this as a recording afterwards, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. I'd also like to welcome Victoria Elliott, pardon. She is a collaborator on this project. She's from Wild Animal Initiative, and she is joining us today to answer some questions that any of you guys might have. So thank you so much, Victoria. So I think our first question related to this project, what do you foresee are the advocacy opportunities that would stem from this kind of research? Victoria, are you there? It looks like she's having trouble unmuting. Let me try it from my end. Victoria, did it work? No, we seem to be having troubles. Well, unfortunately, we can't get Victoria's microphone to work. Apologies. But thank you again, Victoria, for joining us. And perhaps if anybody has any other questions, they can reach out to either Benjamin or Victoria. Yeah, so thank you so much. And thank you again to our wonderful audience for joining us. Please keep your eye out for post-conference communications on ways you can continue to be involved in protecting aquatic animals. And for the remainder of today, you can stay logged into Zoom or follow along with the agenda on the Huba app, which is also a great networking platform for those of you who are interested. Our next session relates to another neglected region, Latin America. And just a reminder, that session will be in Spanish, and that session will begin at 1:30, so in about 15 minutes. And yeah, stay tuned and thanks again.